Good day everyone, I am Michael, moderator for this webinar. I welcome everyone for today's webinar, which is US FDA's AI Framework for Medical Devices. I would now like to introduce our presenter for today, John E. Lincoln. John E. Lincoln is a principal of J.E. Lincoln and Associates LLC. I would now like to hand over the floor to the speaker. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you all for attending. We're going to be talking about AI, which is a growing, changing field. So we want to keep that in mind as we go through this entire discussion. We're going to use the term machine learning as well in this. You might broadly define AI or AI as basically the ability for a machine or computer system to reason, to learn, to act on things. We'll be talking about things like ML/DSF, machine learning enabled device software functions, and how those are spelled out in a submission or in your documentation for your products to meet regulatory expectations. And then you notice here we have PCCP, predetermined change control plans. But we will talk about the current guidances and the framework on which the FDA currently has structured itself to deal with basically software as a medical device, SAM devices. We'll consider software validation considerations in a general sense as well. The goal is to imitate human intelligence, both in terms of data gathering and sorting, which is more of the ML function. Now, again, the goal is to mimic human decision process. Sometimes we don't always feel that as manufacturers, but they really do want to see new improved products hit the marketplace. Now, it talks about machine learning, which remembers a subset of AI. It's the supervised or unsupervised. Data and huge amounts of data is the most important ingredient for training AI algorithms. That would be in developing those algorithms and validating those algorithms. Okay, there's two types of AI we'll be talking about here, generative and predictive. You're moving ahead, but now predictive is basically wading through tons of data. You notice here again, as the field grows, it will migrate more to see use in devices at point of care. Validation of the AI ML device is best performed using data from an institution or institutions that differ from those that inform the development of the algorithm. That's obviously. Now, here's an interesting thing. We think of black box. I will talk about it when we do software validation. Okay, now I mentioned two types of black box. Inherently, this is the nature of the beast, so to speak, and then deliberately, where you develop it yourself and you don't share the details with others. Of course, the goal is to be transparent wherever possible, but again, AI has a lot of areas that get into the gray areas here. So your goal is to place it in as low a risk category as possible based on the clinical use and the device use. So here, the bottom line here is the whole issue revolves around this. So you notice here, this is only preliminary. What we're bringing out here is the first baby steps of the agency into wading into an area that none of us know what the final outcome will be like. Okay, let's look at the regulatory requirements. The focus of this, the framework, is under this heading, Marketing Submission Recommendations for a Predetermined Change Control Plan. That's the PCCP. Now here, Machine Learning Enabled Device Software Functions, or MLDSFs. You're going to see that throughout here. FDA desires to support the iterative improvement through modifications, and using these considerations. Machine learning obviously allows software to learn through data without being programmed. In other words, without human intervention to perform a task. So the areas that they want to see in a PCCP, now they're talking about what is to submit to them, but it's what you need to monitor everything from then on. A detailed description of the specific plan device modifications. These are self-modifications. They want to see develop a system that's safe and effective. That's bottom line FDA. In the past, whenever you made a major change to your device or a cumulative series of changes which finally reached a tipping point, there's two guidance documents out there that tell you then you have to submit a new 510K. Now you notice here it includes also the machine language. Now it is a draft guidance, but remember, when it's finally published, it'll more than likely reflect much of what's in the draft guidance. That's usually the case. You're expected to be submitting that into a marketing submission, which is a marketing submission is either a 510K or a PMA. Substantial equivalence, so a predicate device. The guidance is general. It doesn't intend to get into the details of a PCCP program. It's up to you to make that determination. And then a various appendix of some of the considerations to be addressed under a PCCP. data management issues, reference standard determination, retraining and implementation. And think about that as the retraining of your AI. Triggers for evaluation where necessary, metrics, performance targets, additional testing needs, update, software verification and validation, and of course communication to the user. And a monitoring plan, that's post-market monitoring. It's required virtually of all devices. Used to be just implants, but some of the information to provide in the PCCP as well to flesh it out. Now, cybersecurity, with you're dealing with a SAMD, you will be dealing with cybersecurity issues because they can or are connected to the internet. So you have to consider you as the ultimate manufacturer, you with the name on the label, are ultimately responsible for all of this. And same again, life cycle from cradle to grave. Okay, software changes. We're going to just talk a little bit about validation. So we're just going to quickly go through this because this is just general software validation information, but bear in mind you're going to have to validate the system. Mention the need with validation as a overall activity, verification is so when I talk about verification, I mentioned working definitions, I explained them, but here I have them summarized. Cybersecurity issues, these are some areas under the cybersecurity guidance document and NIST. When I'm developing requirements, I list all the requirements. I pull out those requirements of dealing with installation. With what we're talking about here, it'd be installing the software into the hardware. And this is just a recommendation of the format of a test protocol. Here's the 11 requirements on the guidance document. You have a level of concern, minimal, moderate, or major based on risk. So some of the concerns regarding cybersecurity, that has to be factored in as well as those 11 elements we mentioned earlier. There's an example of a Gantt chart to control the project and or the validation of the project. There's an example of a IQ. There's an example of an OQ. You notice it just has some elements to test on the left-hand side. Here's an example of a PQ. Part 11, basically I just take Part 11 and take all the subparts of Part 11 and ask myself, how can that subpart be changed into a question? There's an example of a test case written from a question. Part 11 is for GMP compliance. And we mentioned the format, again, of the test. That's just a suggestion. There's no one way to do that. And this has to be done cradle to grave. You're responsible for the device and some of the considerations. I mentioned IEC 62304. That there's an example of 62304. So the 2 pages dealing with 62304 summed up. And SOUP software, this is software with unknown provenance. And we're not going to get involved in the system administrator. That's not an issue. Logins would be an issue with your app. With electronic signatures, that gets into only GMP issues. Some of the key takeaways would be that PCCP, how are you going to handle change control when it's done automatically by the AI? Well, thank you. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, John. So that does conclude the session for today. I hope it was an informative for all of us. Thank you everyone for participating. You may all disconnect now. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.